Hello, welcome to part one of Carl Rogers and Person-Centered Theory podcast. This is Anthony Cannella, the Spring 12 TA, and this will be a podcast in multiple parts. I'm going to try to keep it to two, but I thought that it would be best to split up the time for you guys. This is my first time doing a podcast, so hopefully it will come out good enough that you guys get something from it. It is, something new to me, but I'm hoping that I learned enough, and I think I should do fine. Carl Rogers, of course, is a major factor in the humanistic counseling theories. That is, of course, humanistic coming from the person. The focus is on the client. So I will walk you through his bio in this podcast, as well as touch upon some of his theory as well. It's also important to note that I am a person-centered theorist. I practice mainly according to person-centered theory. Here is Carl, the focus of our presentation. Carl Rogers was born January 8th in 1902. As you can see, he was a middle child, if we're looking at birth order. However, interestingly, his theory does not really consider birth order. It is more individualized. He is the fourth of 6 children, so he did come up with a pretty big family. And Carl grew up in suburban Illinois. He actually reports very early on that he was a lonely young man, lonely boy. They did have pretty good relationships, the children, with the family. He did say, later on in his memoirs and his work, that his family was close, that they had very warm relationships, but he felt that he was sort of stifled by a strict Protestant upbringing. There was not a lot of fun in Carl Rogers' house. He actually, the getting out for him was serving as an altar boy. So despite the fact that his family was close, in a way, they might have been too stifling. And that, of course, is going to be reflected in his reserved nature as a counselor. And a lot of his life and his work is not very showy, but you'll see it's very good. And again, that warmness translates to the clients. So during the early years, Carl was actually a very intelligent young man. From an early age, his teachers and instructors praised Carl for advanced reading ability. He was a very good writer from an early age. So he was generally a very bright boy that people could see. He had a very good possibility of becoming successful. However, Carl was definitely an introvert. He was a very quiet, private person in his teens and his early 20s. And as a child, they said again that he would be very quiet and not very fun. But again, this introversion will basically become part of his therapy. He was constantly looking within himself and trying to find the answers from himself. That being said, he had a religious education, which will somewhat shape his demeanor, especially in the early part of his upbringing. And Carl was really, really confused about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Much like most of us, I'm sure. I'm on my second career myself. I'm sure some of you are also making career changes. Carl started out that he wanted to be in agriculture. He wanted to be in farming and working with livestock. This changed to becoming a history professor. And finally, he actually wanted to be in the religious occupation. He wanted to work for the Protestant church. and he actually joined the seminary. So Carl was on board to become a priest for quite some time. And it wasn't until there was a trip to Peking, China, that would actually change Carl's ideals. What happened here was he actually started to begin to doubt his religious aspirations. He actually attended a seminar in China that was basically why they would want to go into the priesthood. And what Carl took out of that was that I do not want to be in the priesthood. And he wound up leaving, and was from there, as you can see here, he was in the seminary for 2 years and then wanted to become a psychologist. So he finally settled in on his career. This always made me feel a little bit better because, of course, in changing careers, someone that is a master, even they have some problems early on with what they want to do for the rest of their lives. So from here, this is where Carl really starts emerging as a theorist. He leaves the seminary after 2 years, and from there he attends the Teachers College at Columbia University. He works first towards his master's, and then becomes a PhD. During this time, his doctoral work was really settled in on child welfare. He was very, very concerned with the welfare of children, and actually became the director of the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in New York. So he oversaw much of the work that would deal with children in the mental health field in New York. I really like this a lot, of course, because being a school counselor and working with adolescents, this is a very important development. And, of course, you know, as he worked for his PhD, he was very concerned with children. This is almost, in a way, the roots of school counseling. From here, Carl publishes his first work, The Clinical Treatment of the Problem Child. Very good work. Maybe slightly dated in this day and age, but still worthwhile nonetheless. And what Carl will do is he will wind up teaching. He becomes a counselor educator, a psychologist educator through here. Carl was very, very interested in the work of a man named Otto Rank. And this actually helped Carl shape his theory. He started developing a theory through the work of Otto Rank. Otto Rank is actually Freud's closest or associate. You would say he is his right-hand man, if you will. And Otto Rank was actually very interesting. He probably would be noted as the first paid psychologist. He was someone that, after the circle that Freud was commandeering, he would actually go out and basically, you know, practice and get paid for his work. So Rank actually was a little bit different than Freud. You could see also a lot of theorists will really trace him back to where they were inspired by. One such person would be Rollo May, who was a very important figure in existential therapy, very influenced by Otto Rank as well. And you can see Mr. Rank right below the Carl Rogers on the top, and Otto Rank with one of his seminal works. This right there is actually a biography about Otto Rank, Acts of Will. And basically, the thing that Carl really liked from Otto Rank was working in the here and now. They both thought Rank was the first people to think that what happens right then and there in the session is very key. It's very important to work right through what is going on currently. There's a lot of stuff that goes unsaid, a lot of nonverbal cues, and what Rogers did was he took most of this idea and felt that a caring therapist would actually allow the clients to resolve the difficulties and actually start changing themselves. So he took that here and the now idea and also made it his own. Made it his own as in he was really, again, caring. He was a quiet person, but also a very caring person. And he felt that if he showed his clients that he cared, that he loved them in a sense, they would respond well. What he does is he starts testing his methods at the University of Chicago. Here are the major works of Carl Rogers. The first, in his main findings during his testing, is client-centered therapy, which is published in 1951. And then he sort of updates that book and expands upon it in Psychotherapy and Personality Change, which published in 1954. During this time, Carl also became the president of the American Academy of Psychotherapists. He worked extensively with training individuals during this time. And you'll see he comes out with his absolute seminal work on becoming a person. That would be, if you really, should read this. I would say it's very important for beginning counselors and psychologists to just see how Rogers operated. I think it's phenomenal because what he does in this is he winds up showing the power of the client and their willingness to change, as well as showing how a very caring individual could shape someone's life. And that could be applied in many different settings in many different ways. So later on in his life, Carl does found the Center for Studies of the Person. This, of course, is the benchmark, the home base, if you will, of the person-centered theory. Of course, it's still going. And most importantly, Carl actually applied his theories to oppressed groups. He actually would travel. He traveled to Belfast, Ireland, many different racial groups. And really what he wanted to do, Carl Rogers, really promoted world peace. He thought that his principles, if everyone basically developed them, there should be no wars, there should be no fighting, and everyone would basically get along. Here's Carl in the later years. This is actually after he, of course, is somewhat advanced in age. I think that was taken in during the 80s. Carl did die in 1987. But when you are transcribing your tape sessions for practicum and internship, you could actually thank Carl for that. I know it's a bit of a pain, but the good thing about Carl Rogers seeing this was he said, I'm actually going to take the sessions that I have word for word, and if I'm going to be able to detail what I see through that. And the great thing about that is he wound up just really analyzing his sessions more to help his clients. So he was the first to do that. It's a very time-consuming thing, but it was pretty much a great contribution as well. He also was the first researcher to incorporate quantitative research into the field. And what that does is it basically really supports his theories, gives concrete evidence. Quantitative research, for those that have not taken methods of research yet, is actually research using numbers. So Carl actually strongly believed that he had to support his theories with the use of numerical data. During the later years, he also was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is obviously an extreme honor, and he was very, very happy to just receive the nomination. He did not win. Carl actually died in 1987, actually right after speaking and doing a seminar. He fell, and he did survive the fall, but later on he actually died of pancreas failure. It was probably a few days later he was the age 85, so he lived a robust and productive life. So if we look at Carl Rogers' theory now, we could trace its development into 4 distinct periods. And what you'll see is the theory will basically evolve. I won't spend too much time on this, but I will actually, it would be important for you to have each period. The first period is, of course, during the 1940s, when Carl Rogers develops his counseling. Now, we always hear non-directive in regards to person-centered counseling. And when we say non-directive, that means basically that the counselor is not giving commands. It's a lot of rhetorical questioning. It's a lot of questioning that will initiate an inward journey into the client. The client will go into themselves. It's very important to note that Carl Rogers felt, of course, that there was no advice giving. Earlier psychotherapists would say, why don't you try doing this, try doing this. This came directly from the client. So this is when Rogers initially started his non-directive approach. Now, the one thing that I will argue and say as a devil's advocate here, that non-directive counseling could possibly be the most directive counseling. I know I'm contradicting myself here, but just think of how directive it might be and how intense it could be for the client to have absolute power into their inner journey. The biggest thing about that is, of course, that they're going inward, and it could be a very confrontational type of counseling. But Rogers did it in such a peaceful and, a way that was really not questioning, not directive, that it wound up becoming even more direct. And that could be seen, actually, when you guys watch the Gloria tapes, if you haven't already. You could start to see, it could get a little uncomfortable. And Rogers could be a little directive there and working with her. So the second period was actually during the 1950s, the next decade. And basically what this period saw was Carl renaming his theory to client-centered approach. And the reason why he did this was to put the emphasis on the client. Once again, he wanted to show that the client was in power of their own destiny. The other thing that he incorporates here is, again, you see that funky word, phenomenological view. He adopted this view as well. We did speak about this in Adler. And again, it was viewing the client's viewpoint from themselves. That would be the most, everybody has a different view of the world, and that would be the most effective way to understand the client for their own personal viewpoint. So we have to understand the client through their view. The third period is the 1960s, and really what here, he doesn't change the name of his counseling here, but basically he starts applying his theories to education. He wants to see how this reacts, and basically it's becoming one's experience. Again, the personal perspective. What he does here is he starts testing the hypothesis. You'll see in 1961, of course, again, his best work on becoming a person is published. And really what he's doing now is also tracking long-term client progress and seeing exactly how they progress through therapy. Again, remember, this is a time where he starts seeing everything come together. He's been doing this now for close to 20 years. So this is when he starts backing up with the research. And the fourth period is going to be the later period, the 1980s, before he passes away. The last 20 years before this, 60s and 70s, he's really perfecting, honing his theory. Now finally, before he does pass away, he renames his theory person-centered approach. And the reason for that is he wanted to get away from the client stigmata and go more with the person. Everybody is a person. What he does also is he starts expanding, like we said, to treat different subgroups. It starts going in different settings, group counseling now at this point, working with minorities, working with specific populations. This is really the perfection and the modern thought of Carl Rogers' theory. So basically, if we start getting to the bare bones of the humanistic approach, we have to go back to take a look at someone named Abraham Maslow. And Maslow was someone that basically was an earlier psychologist, and he came up with something called the hierarchy of needs. As you could see, that this also has a parallel with existential theory, but they're absolutely not the same. We will be talking about existential theory in class a bit, and we also will have a podcast up for you on that. And Maslow was the first person to coin the term self-actualization, which Carl Rogers eventually puts into his therapy. It's very, basically key person-centered theory. But basically, Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs, which is to determine why individuals would not self-actualize, that there's something preventing them to do so. And basically what you're going to see is, and I'll use my mouse to explain this, the first things that have to be met are physiological needs, which is basic food, water. That is just the bare bones of surviving, right? Sleep. Going up, finally, you'll have a safety needs. You need shelter. And when you think about this, if you do not have shelter, then of course you're not going to be able to reach the thing up here. If you don't have food, you cannot reach these. It will prevent you from doing so. Think about if you're starving and you have no home, how would you be able to self-actualize? But as we go up, the needs become a bit more personalized. We need love, right? Intimate relationships and friends. Then a sense of accomplishment. And once all of these are met, eventually we will be able to achieve the full potential of self-actualization. And this is something, again, that is developed by Abraham Maslow, but the coined term self-actualization comes up big time, as you will see in the person-centered theory. Finally, while we look at this, here are a couple bare bones things, underlining principles of the humanistic approach. Basically, Rogers trusted his client's ability to progress. Rogers felt very strongly that only the client would be able to know exactly what they want and work towards doing it. He also believed that humans, at our core, are positive, good people. It is only some outside things that will cause people to do bad things. So again, this is, in a way, you could see the religious viewpoint again coming up. Everyone is good, everyone is trustworthy, and the clients have the power. He also thought that lives are a process. They're absolutely always changing. People are always changing. And we have to change with the forces. And finally, again, like I said, that people are inherently good. And you'll see in person-centered theory, it's the counselor's focus to make the clients to actually tap into that potential. The people are born good, and then they might lose themselves. And what happens is the counselor needs to help the person tap into their own personal resources to see what they like and what they want to become. Very interesting. I like this quote right there, again, to show the process of change. Carl Rogers said, "Life at its best is a flowing, changing process in which nothing is fixed. We are always moving, always going forward and backward." So that concludes our first section of the podcast. I will try my best to put on everything that is remaining, I thought this would be a good break, because what comes up next will be the major tenets of the theory, and I wanted to have that all together for you. So hopefully I did a pretty good job on my first podcast, and if you see me, you could let me know. This is how we will stop it.